There are two things that every sailor fears: sinking to the depths and fire at sea. The confined spaces in a vessel can quickly consume any oxygen in a fire, and despite having an endless supply of water around you, it can be very difficult to put out a fire. This is a compilation of some of the worst fires at sea. You may have already seen some of these as individual stories on this channel, so use the chapters in the description below to navigate the stories in this compilation. The Doña Paz is the largest peacetime ferry disaster in the world, claiming almost 4,500 lives in a matter of less than an hour. This accident shines the spotlight on an industry that's claimed the lives of thousands more. But is it the tip of an iceberg or just bad luck? Valeriana Duma is 14 years old. Her employer calls her Valerie. Valerie works for a family in Tacloban in the Philippines as a housemaid. Her dad doesn't like it, but the family can use the extra money. One of the perks of the job is when the family travel to Manila and they take Valerie with. On the 20th of December 1987, just 5 days before Christmas, Valerie is at the docks with her employers boarding the Doña Paz ferry. Valerie likes going to Manila, but she doesn't care for the ferry journey. It's always crowded, and now, days before Christmas, the ferry is more crowded than usual. While Valerie's employers have booked tickets, they had not thought to bring Valerie until the last minute, and so they don't have a ticket for her. When they get to the gate, they learn that all the seats are sold, but the ticket agent takes a small bribe and grants Valerie access with her employer, a common practice especially around the holiday season. As they push past hundreds of people who are sitting and lying in the passageways, Valerie realizes there's no place to sit except on the top deck at the very back of the ship. Valerie's employers are anxious, but they've seen it before. They tell Valerie that the ship gets so busy at Christmas that there aren't enough life jackets for everyone on board, and so they've bought one for her. A small pang of fear shoots through her stomach. She doesn't like the idea of needing a life jacket. The Doña Paz was a ferry built in Japan in 1963. When it was launched, it had a passenger capacity of 608 people plus crew of around 50. It relocated to the Philippines in 1975 when its new owner, the Sulpicio Lines, deployed it to transport up to 1,518 passengers between Manila and Cebu. In 1979, it caught fire while underway. Luckily, all 1,164 passengers and crew survived because the ship was beached in shallow water, which provided an escape route. The ship was gutted by the fire and written off as a total loss. Sulpicio Lines claimed on their insurance and then bought the wreck back from the underwriters and rebuilt it. While they were at it, they added another 2 decks to the original 2 decks. But they didn't update her certificate of stability, which rates how stable the ship is when it's floating. What's more important is the ability to increase the passenger count. As a flagship for Sulpicio Lines, it's reassigned to a route between Tacloban and Manila with a stop in Catbalogan, which it completes twice a week. The Doña Paz departs Tacloban at 06:30 in the morning, stopping at Catbalogan, and then continues to Manila for arrival at 0400 the next morning. Valerie sits quietly, huddled on the aft deck. A man near her relieves himself over the side of the ship. There are too many people to fight his way to the bathrooms. The captain of the Doña Paz, Eusebio Nazareno, and his crew do everything they can to accommodate their passengers, or possibly to accommodate more passengers. Luckily, the weather is calm and clear. The sea is a little choppy, but Valerie doesn't mind that much as long as it's warm and dry. For a ferry like Doña Paz, these conditions are almost ideal, and so the passengers and crew settle in for the journey. At around 22:30, the Doña Paz is in the Tablas Strait. Seemingly out of nowhere, an oil tanker appears almost immediately ahead of the Doña Paz. It collides with the tanker in an explosion of twisting metal. The tanker's petrochemical cargo bursts into flames and pours into the ferry. The 51-meter-long oil tanker Vector is traveling from Bataan to Masbate with over 1 million liters of gasoline and petrol products. It's under charter by Caltex, which is a joint venture between Chevron and Texaco. The Vector is crewed by 13 people, but the captain of the ship and his first mate are not qualified for their positions. Passengers and crew on board the ferry are jolted awake as panic and flames engulf the two ships. The flames from the tanker's cargo are spilling out onto the sea and forming a cauldron of floating flames that spread hundreds of meters in diameter. To avoid the fire in the ship, passengers are jumping overboard into the flaming sea. They have to fight their way through the flames, charred bodies, black smoke, and shark-infested waters. On the ship, passengers search for life vests, but they're locked away, and there's certainly not enough for almost 4,500 people on the overloaded ferry. The temperature is rising. The petrol from the oil tanker continues to spill into the ocean, fueling the fire around the two ships. Valerie is jolted awake from a shallow sleep. A man next to her is with his daughter. He's shouting for people to get off the ferry. That man is Salvador Bascal, a fisherman who's seen flames on boats before and knows how quickly they can spread. Now Valerie feels something different. She's relieved that she has a life jacket and terrified that she's going to get to use it. But she's not going to wait around to find out if the flames will make it to the back of the ship. She can see the flames on the water and the circle is growing quickly, so she jumps overboard with Salvador and his daughter. A passing ship sees the explosion and sails towards the flames. It takes the MS Don Claudio an hour to get as close as safely possible, then throws a net over the side of the ship for survivors to climb. In fact, it only gets within a 2-mile radius of the burning ships. Going closer means it would start to sail into patches of fiery water, which any sensible captain would avoid in order to keep his ship and crew safe. Luckily, it comes up to the rear of the Doña Paz. Valerie, Salvador, and his daughter are 3 of only 26 people to survive. They had to swim for over an hour to stay out of the reach of the ever-growing ring of fire caused by the petroleum burning on the surface of the water. In fact, most of the people that survived were those that jumped from the back of the Doña Paz and were lucky enough to swim in the direction of the MS Don Claudio. Over 4,000 people died in the flames and sinking ships. The Doña Paz sank in 1,500 feet of water 2 hours after it struck the oil tanker Vector, which sank 2 hours later. One survivor recounts trying to pull his daughter to safety, but the skin on her arm slides away and she sinks back into the ocean. For a ship that's registered to carry 1,518 people, the Doña Paz was carrying 4,374 people, including the crew. Valerie was not the only person to board the ferry without an official ticket. The ferry was overloaded by almost 3,000 people over its authorized limit. It takes almost 8 hours for the Philippine Coast Guard to be notified. Then another 6 hours for them to raise the closest Coast Guard station. The Doña Paz and the Vector have long since sank. In the weeks and months that follow, the question on everyone's mind is, how could this happen? 2 vessels at sea on a calm and clear night collide, and almost 4,500 people die. The investigation starts to uncover a litany of offences. Between the 13 crew on the Vector and 56 crew on the Doña Paz, there was only 1 sailor on watch, and he was an unqualified apprentice. The crew on the Doña Paz were drinking and certainly not at their assigned stations. The captain was watching a movie. Maritime law requires a watch at all times. If crew were on watch at their stations, they would have seen the oncoming ship with enough time to alter course. The blame is ultimately assigned to the tanker, which was understaffed. The crew on board were not qualified, and the tanker was operating without a certificate of inspection. Perhaps the blame was assigned to the wealthier oil company with deeper pockets. But the ferry was not without blame. It was overloaded to the point that passengers were sleeping in the hallway, and the ship was listing to one side under the top heavy weight. Although overloading was not the cause of its sinking, more lives were lost because of corrupt practices at every level of the inspection process that allowed it to sail with so many passengers. All the life vests were locked away, and it had no radio to communicate with ships that might be on a collision course. These factors contributed to the severity of the accident. But the one thing that would have avoided the accident entirely was having an appropriate watch system on either one or both ships. The tanker didn't appear out of nowhere. There was simply nobody on watch to see it coming. To me, there's one major omission in the investigation, and that comes down to the fact that 2 ships are operating without any oversight from the law. If one ship is poorly manned and unlicensed, you could blame the captain. But when 2 ships in the same waters suffer the same ailment, you have to look at the climate in which they operate. The Doña Paz is able to get her certificate of inspection and a license to carry passengers even though it doesn't have an up-to-date certificate of stability after adding 2 extra decks. The Coast Guard, who are responsible for inspecting ships to make sure they are not overloaded, are accepting bribes to look the other way, particularly in the holiday season. Large oil companies like Chevron and Texaco are chartering ships that aren't properly licensed and don't have qualified crew. At every stage of the inspection process, the authorities not only aren't doing their job, they're actually accepting bribes to look the other way, while companies put their passengers and cargo at risk in the name of profit. This culture created an environment that allowed 2 ships to operate unchecked. What likely started as a practice of overbooking by 1 or 2 extra passengers turned into overloading the Doña Paz by almost 3 times its registered capacity. This culture turned a blind eye to crew members having a beer on duty and not manning their stations. This same culture of corruption allowed the tanker Vector to sail with an unqualified crew, also not at their stations. In 2015, Sulpicio Lines lost their license to carry passengers. Not before 3 more of their ships sank, with a further loss of almost 1,500 lives. In the 15 years prior to the Doña Paz accident, there were 80 collisions, 177 sinkings, 53 fires, and a total of 4,000 deaths on board ships off the waters of the Philippines. Including the Doña Paz, that's over 10,000 people in a 43-year period. That's roughly 232 deaths per year. But the Philippines has over 7,000 islands and must rely on ferries for transport. By the very nature of being on the sea rather than the roads, you have to expect there will be accidents at sea. Vietnam has roughly the same population, but its geography is not dominated by islands like the Philippines. In 2016, the death toll on the roads of Vietnam was over 24,000 people in just that 1 year. By comparison, roads are far more deadly. During the investigation into the Doña Paz accident, senior members of the Coast Guard acknowledged that officials sometimes accept bribes to look the other way. They also point out they're understaffed and don't have the resources to inspect every ship. Valerie never received the $500 compensation offered to families of the victims because she was not registered on the manifest. She didn't have enough money to return home, and it took 25 years to reunite with her father. Sulpicio Lines now sail cargo instead of passengers. Since 2016, there have been 113 deaths in maritime accidents, making it one of the safest means of transport in the Philippines. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch more videos from this channel without any ads, consider joining our Patreon. The link is in the description. You can join for free or select a membership with benefits ranging from ad-free videos through to early access and live Q&A calls. I look forward to meeting you there. On Monday the 2nd of September 2019, dive boat motor vessel Conception is engulfed in flames off the coast of California, taking the lives of 34 people trapped in their bunks. Truth Aquatics is a company based in Santa Barbara, California, founded in 1974 and owned by Glenn Fritzler. The company is a well-known and reputable operator in the diving world, offering recreational diving and snorkeling adventures around the Channel Islands off the coast of California. At the Channel Islands National Park, passengers can go scuba diving, kayaking, paddleboarding, whale watching, fishing, and swimming. In August 2019, a group of 33 passengers is scheduled to depart Santa Barbara on the 31st of August at 0400, returning on the 2nd of September. Since they'll be departing so early in the morning, the passengers are given the option to spend the evening of the 31st of August aboard the vessel. Their vessel for this trip will be the motor vessel Conception. Conception is a 23-meter liveaboard vessel built in Long Beach, California, and launched in 1981. It's designed and built specifically to carry passengers on overnight trips around the Channel Islands. Federal and international regulations require that vessels over a certain size be made of fire-resistant materials. These vessels also need to be fitted with fire sprinklers and smoke detectors, which are wired into the ship's electronics or linked to the bridge. Given the vessel's age and size, Conception at less than 100 gross tons and with fewer than 49 berths isn't covered by those regulations. It's constructed of wood covered with fiberglass, which was allowed by regulations last updated in 1978. The most recent Coast Guard inspection in August 2018 and February 2019 don't show any noteworthy violations. The vessel's certificate of inspection allows a maximum capacity of 103 persons, 4 crew and 99 passengers. The vessel is laid out with 3 decks. The upper deck consists of the wheelhouse, crew quarters, and a sun deck lounge area. The main deck just below the upper deck includes a large cabin. This cabin consists of a galley in the forward segment of the cabin where crew prepare meals, and a salon in the aft segment with seating for meals. The salon is accessed from the stern through a hallway lined with restrooms. On the lower deck, up to 46 people can sleep in 13 double bunks and 20 single bunks, with 1 bunk reserved for crew. The lower deck also consists of the shower area, anchor locker, engine room, and a lazarette, which is a stowage area for equipment needed in the engine room. The rest of the crew berths are located 2 decks above in the aft portion of the wheelhouse on the upper deck. If you're in the bunk quarters, there are 2 ways to exit. You can go up the spiral stairs and through the salon to pass through the doors at the back, or you can climb the ladder through the 22-inch escape hatch, which also leads you to the salon and exit through the same doors at the back. On the evening of the 30th of August 2019, passengers begin to board Conception in preparation for their early departure the following morning. They board the vessel via the main deck and make their way to the bunk quarters, where they're each assigned a bed. This will be their bed for the entire voyage. Operating the vessel and overseeing the voyage are 6 crew members: Captain Jerry Boylan, First Mate Cullen Molitor, First Deckhand Milton French, Second Deckhand Ali Kurtz, First Galley Hand Ryan Sims, and Second Galley Hand Mike Coles. First Mate Cullen Molitor is the first to arrive boarding Conception at around 2200 and is joined by galley hands Sims and Coles at around 2300. Deckhands French and Kurtz and Captain Boylan arrive at around 0300 on the morning of the 31st of August to make ready and depart 1 hour later. All the crew members will be sleeping in the crew quarters on the upper deck of Conception, except for Deckhand Kurtz, who will sleep with the passengers in the bunk quarters. After checking the vessel and equipment, they depart Santa Barbara Harbor at 0404. Conception will make various stops around Santa Cruz Island, the largest of the islands that make up the Channel Islands National Park. At 0830, Conception arrives at its first stop, Albert's Anchorage, a dive site on the south side of Santa Cruz Island. The spot is nestled close to the island and provides amateur divers with protection from the strong winds in the area. After casting anchor at Albert's Anchorage, the passengers gather in the salon for breakfast and a safety briefing by First Deckhand Milton French. The safety briefing includes information on where to find life jackets, where to gather during an emergency, and how to escape from the salon and bunk quarters. During the safety briefing, one of the passengers faints. After the passenger is revived, French continues the briefing. The next 2 days are smooth sailing. On the evening of the 1st of September, the passengers go for a night dive at Quail Rock on the northwestern side of Santa Cruz Island. While the passengers are enjoying the night dive, Galley Hands Coles turns on the air conditioning in the bunk quarters so the room will be cool for the guests by the time they go to bed. After the night dive, Conception makes its way to Platts Harbour where it will anchor for the night. As the guests are preparing for bed, many of them plug in their phones, cameras, laptops and tablets to charge. With so many devices plugged in at once, there aren't enough outlets for all the guests. Galley hand Sims plugs his phone into charge and sees a tiny spark at the outlet. By midnight, all crew members are asleep, even though the law requires a crew member to patrol throughout the night when passengers are aboard, but the crew never actually do this. Going into the morning of the 2nd of September at 01:30, galley hand Coles wakes up. He's sleeping in the crew quarters on the upper deck. Instead of going back to sleep, Coles makes his way to the galley to wash some dishes. There's no one else awake, nor anything out of the ordinary. An hour later, at 02:30, Coles makes his way back to bed. Shortly after he's back in his bunk, Coles wakes again. Something's not right. Coles hears a noise that sounds like someone falling, followed by the sound of people yelling. He gets out of bed to check on the situation. As he looks out of the door towards the main deck, he sees a yellow glow. He immediately knows what it is and yells, "Fire! Fire!" to wake the other 4 crew members sleeping nearby. They can hear the fire crackling and popping. Coles heads for the staircase leading down to the main deck, but the passageway down is already blocked by fire. Instead, he climbs over the portside railing and drops to the main deck below. He runs around to the salon's rear door, hoping to reach the fire extinguishers that are stored inside the salon. But the entire salon is already on fire. There's no way in or out. Cole sees the escape hatch to the bunk quarters is also on fire, and the salon's fiberglass ceiling is melting and dripping onto the floor. 34 people are trapped in the bunk quarters below. Meanwhile, deckhands Molitor and French have also made their way down to the main deck. They circle the salon looking for a way in. Galley hand Sims goes to join them, dropping over the railing onto the main deck like the other men had done. Sims lands badly, breaking his left leg in 3 places and seriously injuring his back and neck. French tries to open the only window in the salon, but it opens from the inside and he can't pry it open from the outside. The window is warm and the salon is filling with black smoke. While the crew attempts to rescue the 34 people trapped in the bunk quarters, Captain Boylan is in the wheelhouse on the upper deck making a distress call. At 03:14, the distress call goes out.
Mini! 2 seconds! Platts Harbor! Northside Syracuse! 30 minutes! 3 minutes VOE! I can't breathe! 39 VOE!
Smoke fills the wheelhouse, forcing the captain out. He leaps from the starboard side of the upper deck into the water below. The other 4 crew members are still on the main deck. French calls out to Boylan for the fire axe in the wheelhouse. Boylan has already jumped overboard to escape the smoke and flames. First mate Cullen Molitor assumes the captain has been burned by the fire and jumps into the water to check on him. French is still trying to find a way into the bunkhouse, but there's smoke and fire everywhere he tries. Boylan calls to the 3 crew members on deck to jump into the water, which they do. Soon enough, Molitor realizes that the captain is unharmed and climbs back aboard Conception, desperate to try and save the passengers. But the entire deckhouse is on fire. He decides to launch the skiff and look for any survivors. French comes back aboard and helps him launch the skiff. Then he tries one last time to find a way to help the passengers. Molitor picks up the captain in the skiff. French realizes it's hopeless. He boards the skiff and the 3 pick up the remaining 2 crew members. Grape Escape is another vessel anchored in Platts Harbour at the same time. The passengers aboard are asleep. At 03:29, the 5 crew members in the skiff make their way over and bang on the hull to wake them up. The owners of Grape Escape wake to see Conception on fire from bow to stern.
It was totally gone. I mean, and it was like, my gosh, what do we do?
It was such a hopeless, helpless feeling to watch that boat burn.
Boylan and Molitor continue to make radio calls to the Coast Guard from Grape Escape, while Coles and French assist Smith with his injuries. The Coast Guard's been trying to contact Conception since Boylan's initial distress call, but have been unable to reach anyone. All crew members have abandoned the ship. At 0322, the Sector Command Center in San Pedro estimates Conception's location from its last automatic identification system broadcast and issues an urgent marine information broadcast. Emergency responders from the Coast Guard, Ventura and Santa Barbara County Fire Departments, together with a private company, Towboat US Ventura, rush to the scene. A rescue helicopter takes off from Naval Base Ventura County to assess the situation. While Boylan explains the situation to the Coast Guard over the radio, Molitor and French take the skiff back to the Conception to look for survivors. They don't find anyone. The first Coast Guard response vessel arrives at the scene at 0427, about 2 hours after Coles discovers the fire and an hour and 15 minutes after the captain's first distress call. They find Conception engulfed in flames. The Coast Guard vessel doesn't have firefighting equipment powerful enough to fight such a large blaze. A better equipped Coast Guard harbour patrol boat arrives at 0455 and starts to fight the fire. But it has trouble getting close enough in the shallow water where Conception is anchored. At 0523, a nearby civilian tugboat pulls the burning carcass of Conception into deeper water where the Coast Guard vessel can properly extinguish the flames. By the time the fire is out, large holes have burned through the hull. Before responders can enter the vessel, it sinks, coming to a rest upside down on the seabed. There are no survivors. On Monday, the 2nd of September, divers retrieve 25 bodies. 9 people remain missing. By Wednesday, the 4th of September, all but one of the missing bodies has been recovered, despite the efforts of around 80 divers from 6 different agencies searching the area, including members of the FBI. The last body is located and recovered by divers from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office on Wednesday, the 11th of September. The Santa Barbara coroner conducts an examination of all 34 victims. He concludes that all died from smoke inhalation. Investigations into the incident start before all the bodies have even been pulled from the water. On the 7th of September, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives begin their investigation into the cause of the fire. They predict that the fire began in the aft portion of the Salon, but the vessel is so badly damaged they can't determine the exact cause with any confidence. The most likely cause is an electrical fire. The vessel's electrical systems are old and strained beyond their limits by the air conditioning and the vast quantities of portable devices being charged simultaneously. When Conception is launched in 1981, portable electronic devices aren't nearly as prolific as they are today. On Monday, the 9th of September, a joint federal criminal investigation commences, centering on records from Truth Aquatics. The National Transportation Safety Board finds a number of deficiencies in Truth Aquatics records and that the crew of Conception contributed to the disaster. They believe the probable cause of the incident is the failure by Truth Aquatics to provide effective oversight of the vessel and of crew operations. Truth Aquatics failed to ensure there was a watchman patrolling the vessel overnight, even though it's required by law. This neglect allows the fire to grow undetected in the Salon. There is also a lack of smoke detectors. Conception did have some smoke detectors, but not in the Salon. Contributing to the high loss of life is the inadequate escape arrangements from the bunk quarters. Both escape routes exit into the Salon where the fire is raging. Many lawsuits are filed as a result of the incident and a criminal investigation is opened. But it isn't a relative of one of the victims or even a surviving crew member who files the first lawsuit. It's the owner of Truth Aquatics, Glenn Fritzler. Just 3 days after the incident, on Friday the 5th of September, Fritzler files a lawsuit aiming to limit the company's liability to the value of their ship Conception after it sinks. The Limitation of Liability Act is a maritime law from 1851 which restricts the owner's liability to the value of the vessel. On Thursday, the 12th of September 2019, First Galley Hand Ryan Sims files a lawsuit against Truth Aquatics. He maintains that the crew did not receive proper training and that Conception is not sufficiently fitted out with emergency equipment. By December 2020, 32 of the victims' families have filed lawsuits against Truth Aquatics. These cases are still ongoing. Truth Aquatics is no longer in business. In the summer of 2020, Captain Jerry Boylan is the focus of a federal criminal investigation. In December 2020, he's indicted in front of a jury for 34 counts of seaman's manslaughter, death as a result of misconduct or negligence aboard a vessel. Jerry pleads not guilty and is awaiting trial. In 2021, the victims' families also sue the Coast Guard for its failure to enforce regulations, resulting in the fire and deaths aboard Conception. On the 2nd of September 2019, 34 people lost their lives aboard Conception, and their families are still fighting wrongful death lawsuits. When a ship sinks, it's often difficult for the underwriter to prove foul play, and so it's quite common for insurance claims to be paid out without much question. But when a ship's hijacked in suspect circumstances and the insurance investigator gets blown up, the underwriters aren't quite as willing to simply write a check for $100 million, even when their lives are threatened. In July 2011, piracy in the Gulf of Aden is at its peak. Piracy in the area is directly related to the political environment in Somalia, which has been in a civil war since 1991. Men from Somalia on the west coast of Africa have taken to hijacking ships for ransom. Oil tankers and cargo ships carrying hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cargo make for rich pickings. In some instances, ship owners have paid millions to have their ships released. They face higher charges in late delivery fees or lost income while their ship and crew sit hostage. Other ships take on security forces to prevent pirates from boarding the ship. No matter what way a shipping company handles the threat of piracy, it's an expensive problem that, to a degree, can't be avoided. On the 5th of July 2011, the Brillante Virtuoso oil tanker is sailing through the Gulf of Aden. The crew set up standard deterrents like razor wire, high-pressure hoses, and they prepare a panic room. The ship's owners arrange a security team to escort them through the most dangerous part of their journey. That night, the captain of the Brillante Virtuoso, Noah Gonzaga, orders the crew to cut the engine and drift while they wait for their security detail to board. They're 12 nautical miles off the Yemeni coast in calm and partly cloudy weather. Just before midnight, Alan Marquez is on watch and sees a fast-approaching motorboat on the radar. As it gets closer, he steps out on the lookout deck and can see 7 people dressed in camouflage holding rifles. The second officer alerts the captain. Marquez yells down to the motorboat to identify themselves. A man shouts back that they're the security team and asks to board. Marquez feels unsure, something seems off, and letting armed strangers onto the ship goes against anti-piracy protocol. After radioing for instructions, an order comes back to lower a ladder. 6 men climb up onto the tanker. They're wearing headscarves and hospital masks, and they're armed. Marquez asks for ID. They refuse, take his radio, and demand to be taken to the captain. The captain of the Brillante is in his stateroom when Marquez appears at his door with one of the armed men. The gunmen order the crew to gather in the television room. All 26 crew members assemble. They know they've lost control of the ship. The 6 gunmen split up. 2 take the captain to the bridge, 2 march the chief engineer Nestor Tabares to the engine room, and 2 stand guard outside the TV room. The 24 sailors in the TV room hear gunshots. They don't know what's happened to the captain and chief engineer. The ship starts moving, but they don't know which direction. At 0300, there's an explosion which causes a power outage and sets off alarms. Smoke starts filling the room. The crew try opening the door to escape the smoke and find the 2 guards are gone. The fire escalates out of control and the crew rush to the top of the control center where they find Captain Gonzaga bound by plastic ties. They free him and make a distress call that's picked up by the USS Philippine Sea. Gonzaga gives the order to abandon ship. The crew of the Brillante count off and realize Chief Engineer Tabarez is missing. The fire has reached their level and they can hear metal buckling in the heat. A search party goes back for Tabarez, but the smoke is too thick. At 0400, the crew abandon ship in a lifeboat. A US Navy Seahawk helicopter arrives and sees fire rising from the tanker. At 0500, the helicopter crew sees Tabarez alive on deck waving a flashlight. The flames are too intense for an aerial rescue, so he jumps into the sea and is pulled to safety by a Navy boat. Aboard a US Navy cruiser, Captain Gonzaga tells the Americans that the hijackers ordered him to turn over $100,000 and sail for Somalia. They fired their weapons at the ship's safe when he was slow to open it. He doesn't know what caused the explosion. Tabarez says he disabled the Brillante's engines and escaped but missed the evacuation. The Philippine Sea searches for the fleeing pirates, but they're gone. A tugboat arrives from Aden and pumps seawater onto the Brillante to tame the fire. 7 hours after the gunmen take the ship, a response is mounted. Salvage companies Poseidon and Five Oceans are sent to secure the wreckage. US military investigators are sent to determine if Somali pirates have adopted new tactics. And an investigator from London's insurance companies is engaged to discover what really happened aboard their $100 million liability. Lloyd's of London records lost commercial vessels in a leather-bound book. It's not an insurer but a stock exchange for risk where insurers buy and sell exposure. Premiums generate about $40 billion a year and anything can be insured via Lloyd's with shipping at its core. After a shipwreck, insurance companies and their clients turn to salvage companies to salvage any value they can from a wreckage. Under Lloyd's rules, salvage companies get a percentage of anything they save. It's common for some ship owners to steer business to favored companies for a cut of their compensation. In this instance, a company called Suez, which owns the Brillante Virtuoso, appoints the two salvage companies Poseidon and Five Oceans. 4 days after the Brillante's distress call, its owner, Marius Iliopoulos, flies to Aden and puts the crew up in a hotel. He gives each sailor $200 for new clothes and prepares to submit a claim for his ruined tanker. Before insurers will pay, they need a better understanding of the hijacking, and so they've appointed David Mockett. Every port has a small corps of marine surveyors who establish the facts of incidents for Lloyd's and global shipping. Their assessments often determine payment or denial of a claim. Many are former captains who develop investigative skills. Mockett is the top surveyor in Aden. David Mockett was born near Plymouth. He signed up with a merchant shipping line, sailed predominantly around Saudi Arabia in the 70s. In 1998, he moved to Yemen. Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the Middle East and one of the most dangerous. Getting shot in Yemen helped Mockett develop some credibility with the locals. Mockett contacts the salvage company Poseidon, but the head salver Vasilius Virgos refuses to give him access to the wreck for almost a week. Mockett eventually charters a fishing trawler to get to the tanker and Virgos accompanies him on his rounds. The ship's in heavy seas. The exterior is intact, but the inside is gutted by the fire. Mockett explores the ship and finds deep puddles of oily seawater from 3 days of firefighting. The accommodation block has blackened metal contorted by the heat. He takes photos as he explores. The engine room is half flooded and too dangerous to go deeper. Mockett gets back to port and starts to compile his report. Pirates don't set fire to valuable ships or abandon them after taking control. They hijack them for ransom. Mockett discusses his suspicions with friends. The evidence doesn't add up. Pirates sometimes use rocket-propelled grenades, which is the only thing he can think of that would cause an explosion and fire, but there's no sign of them anywhere. The crew's accounts are bizarre. It's hard to believe an experienced captain would invite armed men onto his ship in dangerous waters if their identity was questionable. The entire story is suspicious. At Lloyd's, millions of dollars in insured payouts depend on Mockett's findings. In an email, he shares his concerns. He believes the Somali pirates are actually corrupt members of the Yemeni Coast Guard or Navy. He promises to explain more soon. The next day at 1300, Mockett leaves his office and drives to his house for lunch when a bomb detonates under his seat. It kills Mockett instantly and blows his door off its hinges. Mockett's body is thrown from the car, landing on the street next to the broken door. The Yemeni Ministry of Interior orders an investigation, and a friend of Mockett's, Roy Facey, writes a report. In his report, Facey mentions discussing the Brillante with Mockett before his death and hearing him dismiss the story of Somali pirates. Facey suspects Mockett was killed because of what he knew. On the 25th of July, he gets a call from the British Embassy warning him that his life is in danger and to hide until he can be extracted from the country. Facey locks himself in his apartment for over 36 hours. A group of men with American accents arrive in 4x4s and take him to the airport. He assumes there are US Special Forces active in southern Yemeni at the time. Jonathan Totman, a British detective, arrives to investigate Mockett's murder. He's got experience investigating corruption and terrorism in the Middle East. Yemen is in turmoil, its government about to collapse. A suicide bomber kills 9 soldiers just before Tottenham arrives, and he needs heavily armed guards to move around the city. There isn't much evidence for Totman to investigate. The site of the car bomb is cleared quickly and Mockett's laptop disappears into police custody. Al-Qaeda has threatened Westerners in Yemen, but Totman believes it's unlikely to be an act of terror. No militant group claims credit, and the blast was small, killing Mockett but leaving no other injuries on a busy street. After the bombing, one of Mockett's friends asks a Pakistani surveyor to find out more about the Brillante. The Pakistani is arrested and detained for 5 days in a building near the harbour. After his release, he flees the country, and Mockett's friend takes it as a warning to stop asking questions. The ruin of the Brillante is investigated by the US Navy. There's too much money involved to leave questions unanswered. The US Navy writes a skeptical report based on the efforts of the Philippine Sea. They note that it's highly suspicious for pirates to attack a ship so late at night with very little illumination, and that Captain Gonzaga and Chief Engineer Tabares requested to board one of Poseidon's tugboats almost immediately after being rescued and refused officers' requests for more interviews. Pirates in the Gulf of Aden are usually dark-skinned Somalis who speak Somali. The Brillante's crew told Navy investigators that almost all the gunmen had lighter skin and spoke an unidentified form of Arabic. The tanker's data recorder showed it traveled west when Somalia was due south. By late August, the Brillante is anchored in safe waters off the United Arab Emirates and is investigated by a team of inspectors. Among them are agents from the US Naval Criminal Investigation Service, fire and explosive experts hired by the underwriters, and investigators appointed by the companies that own the ship and its cargo. An explosives expert enters a space adjacent to the engine room and spots a bulge in a metal plate on the floor which could only have been made by a bomb. Scuttling or damaging a ship for insurance money is an ideal crime, because there might not be any witness, evidence, or law enforcement. The odds of getting away with it are good, and Lloyd's insurers almost always pay something to avoid customer conflict and keep premiums rolling in. If the Brillante isn't a genuine hijacking, then it is an inside job with a cover-up that extends to murder. 15 months after the attack, a lawyer, Roger Stokes, also a friend of Mockett's, dies in mysterious circumstances after trying to collect an unpaid Brillante fuel bill. Danger seems to follow anyone on the wrong side of the Brillante. In London, 4 months after the attack on the Brillante, 2 groups of insurers face major claims. The first claim relates to the oil cargo. Lead salvage company 5 Oceans is asking for about $30 million from 3 underwriters led by Royal and Sun Alliance as a reward for saving the cargo. The second claim involves the ship Brillante. The company Suez, which is owned by Marius Iliopoulos, wants to recover about $100 million from a group of 10 companies led by Talbot Underwriting Limited. The ship's insurers are reluctant to pay and want more time for their private investigators to track down witnesses. But Royal and Sun are worried the company could get a reputation for hostility towards a client. The cargo insurers don't wait for further investigations and pay out $30 million to the salvers. The Talbot syndicate take a more aggressive approach and deny Suez's claim for the ship. Suez sue the insurers and prepare for trial. The Talbot Syndicate send investigators to the Middle East and Greece to learn more about the attack, the salvage, and to find out more about Suez's owner, Marius Iliopoulos. They learn that one of Iliopoulos' ships has been in trouble off the coast of Aden before. In 2009, a fire broke out on an oil tanker called the Eli, and while the crew fight the blaze, the ship runs aground. 3 months later, it suffers an unexplained accident in calm waters around the Suez Canal and splits in half. The resulting claim for about $35 million is disputed by the ship's insurers and ends up in litigation, but it's settled before trial. The Eli's chief engineer is Nestor Tabares. When the ship ran aground and later broke in two salvage companies responded to both those accidents, Poseidon and Five Oceans. Marius Iliopoulos owned the tanker Eli and Brillante through anonymous offshore companies. He's based near Athens and controls a fast ferry service to Mykonos. Iliopoulos has owned as many as 8 large ships at once. In 1994, an aging freighter he owned with his brothers sank in a storm, killing 24 sailors. Greek authorities charged the Iliopoulos with causing the deaths by negligence. Marius and one brother, Ioannis, were cleared, but their other brother, Antonis, was convicted in 2001, but the case was dropped on appeal. In 2015, the Talbot Insurance Syndicate accuses Iliopoulos of orchestrating an assault on the Brillante Virtuoso. They claim the attack was staged with the involvement of the owner and members of the crew. The insurers claim that the fire was started by a bomb intended to cripple the ship. Talbot cites the inconsistencies in the sailors' statements. The crew initially said the attackers posed as their security team, but later changed their story to say that the gunmen had claimed to be from the authorities, which resolved the question of how Somali pirates could have known the tanker was expecting an escort. The insurers said that Iliopoulos was deeply in debt and the Brillante was losing money. Talbot alleged that Iliopoulos planned the destruction of the Brillante. Iliopoulos denied the allegations and accused the insurers of endangering his reputation. In April 2016, Iliopoulos is summoned to a London court for a pre-trial hearing. Lawyers accuse Iliopoulos of withholding evidence and hacking their agents' emails in Greece. On the stand, he responds with a threat of consequences for the accusations. The judge warns him to behave himself. After the hearing, Iliopoulos is arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud. He's taken to a nearby police station and questioned, then released without charge. Iliopoulos never got his $100 million. The judge denied his claim after his confrontation in court and wrote in his judgment, when Iliopoulos lost his temper and threatened the insurers and their legal representatives, he lost any remaining shred of credibility. David Mockett's death was never solved. Totman, who was sent to investigate, said it could have been anyone from criminals to terrorists to the government. The Brillante Virtuoso's final destination was Gadani Beach in Pakistan, where it was stripped and torn apart by workers for a few dollars a day. Iliopoulos is still involved in shipping in Greece with stakes in ferries and tankers registered through obscure companies. As the oil pours out, the flammable vapor is ignited by the sparks in the buckling hull. Fire shoots out and begins to spread. During the 1960s, as the demand for oil grew in Europe, the petroleum industry realized it would be more economical to transport oil from the Middle East to Europe using ultra-large crude carriers or supertanker vessels. These new supertankers were so large that most older ports in the Atlantic Ocean, North Sea, and the English Channel would not be able to accommodate them. So oil companies proposed a new oil terminal capable of handling these new supertankers. This new terminal would serve as a depot for oil coming from the Middle East and would then be shipped to European refineries using smaller vessels. Oil shipments normally pass through the Suez Canal due to its shorter route from the Middle East to Europe. But because of the canal's vessel size constraints at the time, the supertankers had to use the more expensive and longer route passing through the Cape of Good Hope. The voyage around the southern tip of Africa took 16 days longer, adding 4,800 miles of travel and increasing the overall cost of the voyage by as much much as $20,000, equivalent to $155,000 in 2020. With the closure of the Suez Canal in 1969 because of the Six-Day War between Israel and the Arab states, all ships had to take the longer route. The supertankers carried more load, making them more economical and attractive to use, and so the supertanker was adopted along with the idea of a new terminal to accommodate them. In 1966, the Gulf Oil Corporation identified Woody Island in Bantry Bay Island as the most suitable site for the new terminal. Woody Island offered a long, sheltered, deep water anchorage, and the location was far from any major population centers or shipping lanes. Construction started in 1967, and the terminal was completed in 1969. The onshore facility had a tank farm which included 2 tanks for ballast, used mainly to receive and treat dirty ballast and tank washing water from oil tankers. Another 15 storage tanks with a total capacity of 1.3 million tons of oil were allotted for diesel, crude, and bunker fuel used for marine vessels. 396 meters away from the onshore facility was the offshore jetty, measuring 488 meters in length. The jetty was built on 22 piles or marine structures called dolphins for the supertankers to dock and unload or load their cargo. The west end of the jetty was called Dolphin 1, which was closed off, and the east end was called Dolphin 22. Dolphin 22 housed a security hut, coin telephone box, and was used as the entrance and exit area for people and crew to and from the mainland, and the onshore facility or terminal on the island. When it first opened, the jetty was accessible by a bridge from the island. Later, this was removed, and the workers had to take a boat to get to and from the jetty. In 1968, the tanker motor vessel Universe Island went into service for Gulf Oil Corporation. With a capacity of 312,000 tons, this was the largest vessel in the world at its time, transporting oil from Kuwait to Woody Island. It was the first of 6 supertankers ordered by the company. One supertanker would arrive in Bantry Bay every 10 days, and then 3 smaller feeder tankers would distribute the crude oil to the refineries in Wales, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Spain. The terminal was very successful for the first 5 years of operation. On the 10th of June 1975, the Suez Canal reopened and the route around Africa was once again the more expensive option. Along with the delay and cost of transferring oil to smaller tankers, the supertankers began to appear less attractive economically. A recession and increase in oil prices drove industries to implement a new system called just-in-time to reduce the time spent storing products and improve their cash flow. This meant demand at the Woody Island terminal decreased. By the late 1970s, the local Gulf operating company, Gulf Oil Terminals Ireland, struggled to maintain the viability of the terminal. The company was forced to make a number of cost-saving measures to consolidate the operation and trim the unnecessary costs. The firefighting system at the terminal and offshore jetty had 3 modifications to downgrade the system. The first downgrade in 1970 was the decision not to keep the fire mains pressurized at all times. The dispatcher at the control room located at the terminal would activate the system in an emergency. Next, they removed the automatic trigger in the pre-mixed foam system on the jetty. Again, the system would be operated remotely. Then in 1971, they removed the remote control button in the control room, which triggered the foam on the center platform. The motor vessel Beetlejuice oil tanker had a capacity of 121,400 tons of oil. It was built in 1968 in Saint-Nazaire, France, and owned by Total Oil SA, a French energy and petroleum company. Unlike other large tankers, the Beetlejuice was not equipped with a loadicator or stress calculator used for calculating the stresses and bending forces acting on the ship's structure during loading or ballasting. Ballasting is similar to loading, but instead of cargo, the ship either loads or discharges water to stabilize the ship. The loadicator would allow the master and chief officer to quickly plan cargo and ballasting operations to ensure the ship's stability remains within safe limits. Many ships that carry oil install an inert gas system. Most gas associated with oil or fuels is flammable. An inert gas system is used to pump inert or non-reactive gas like nitrogen or carbon dioxide into an empty tank or enclosed space, which forces out any flammable gas that could catch fire or cause an explosion. But the Beetlejuice didn't have an inert gas system. These safety measures weren't a requirement at the time, and Total didn't invest in them. In 1977, Beetlejuice was dry docked for a special survey in Singapore. The surveyors presented a list of recommendations to replace corroded parts. Some metal deck plates that reinforce areas that are prone to bending and buckling under load, and parts of the permanent ballast tanks and sacrificial anodes. Sacrificial anodes are used to protect metal structures by attracting corrosion to the anode and prolonging the life of the metal they protect. All ships have sacrificial anodes and they have to be replaced frequently. The last suggestion was to coat the permanent ballast tanks with a protective coating. Total rejected all the recommendations because they were considering selling and didn't want to take on the cost. On the 24th of November 1978, the Beetlejuice leaves the Saudi Arabian port of Ras Tanura in the Persian Gulf, bound for Lexus, Portugal, with a full cargo of 74,000 metric tons of Arabian heavy crude oil and 40,000 metric tons of Arabian light crude oil. The Beetlejuice plans to call first at Sines, which is south of Lisbon, to lighten the ship, but the weather is so bad that it can't enter the harbour. So it carries on to Lexus, but a ship has sunk across the harbour entrance, and so it's told to head to Whiddy Island. The Beetlejuice sails for Bantry Bay on the 30th of December and encounters heavy weather in the Bay of Biscay. On its way, it reports an oil leak and is instructed to head to Brest, France at a reduced speed. Luckily, the crew find the leak and repair it. So the Beetlejuice continues on its course to Whiddy Island. On the 4th of January 1979, the Beetlejuice arrives in Bantry Bay. It has to wait to berth because its sister ship, the motor vessel Cassiope, arrived a few days before. It's the Cassiopei's last voyage. It's been sold for scrap and is going to Taiwan to be broken up. On Saturday, the 6th of January at 2000, the Beetlejuice completes berthing at the offshore jetty in around 30 meters of water. The pollution control officer completes the Gulf oil safety checklist on board the vessel, which is required before discharging its cargo. At 23:15, the Beetlejuice starts unloading its 114,000 metric tons of crude oil, which should take 36 hours. On Sunday the 7th of January, some of the crew goes ashore to Bantry Town and expect to be back before midnight. During the day, two surveyors acting for two different prospective buyers of the Beetlejuice visit to assess the condition of the vessel. At 1800, the Beetlejuice completes the discharging of the Arabian heavy crude oil and prepares the remaining 40,000 metric tons of Arabian light crude oil. At 1835, the vessel begins ballasting or filling some of the center ballast tanks with water to compensate for the weight of the discharged cargo and to help stabilize the ship. The surveyors leave the vessel and return to the mainland, and the crew arrive back from their trip to Bantry. On board the Beetlejuice are 41 crew members, the baker's wife, a harbour pilot, and the cargo inspector. In the evening at 2000, the Gulf oil workers begin their night shift, 5 at the terminal and 6 on the jetty. The dispatcher, John Connolly, heads to his post at the terminal's control room. The control room has an unrestricted view of the well-lit jetty and the tanker, so Connolly can easily see all the activity at the jetty. At 2300, the crew notice that the trim and list of the vessel is still not sufficient, so they have a discussion about the ballast. The Beetlejuice has no loadicator to help the master and chief officer calculate the stress and distribution of cargo or ballast on the vessel accurately. At 2330, the crew add ballast to the permanent or dedicated ballast tanks to correct the tanker's trim and list. They're not aware of how corroded the vessel's permanent ballast tanks actually are. As the center and permanent ballast tanks fill with water, the weight shifts and concentrates at the center of the ship, and the vessel begins to sag. The stress builds up amidship, and the badly corroded deck plates and side shell plating begin to buckle. The hull tears apart, exposing live wires. Oil begins to seep from the ruptured storage tanks. Because the Beetlejuice is not equipped with an inert gas system, sparks from the severed electrical cables ignite flammable vapors escaping from the oil pouring out the ruptured tanks. As the vessel's back breaks, a small fire shoots up from the center of the ship at 0031. Large quantities of oil pour out on either side of the vessel and ignite at around 0040. Thick, heavy smoke billows across the center platform, forcing the jetty crew to run for cover. Because the fire main is controlled by Connolly at the control room, the jetty crew can't access the water and foam to put out the fire. Over the radio, the crew on land hear the calls for the safety boats and for the fire hydrants to be turned on. They call the control room, but there's no answer. The dispatcher, John Connolly, has left the control room. Just before 0045, 15 minutes after the first sparks, Connolly sees the flames when he returns to the control room. He immediately activates the fire pumps to operate the firefighting equipment on the jetty. He also attempts to close the emergency block valves to cut off any supply of oil from the ship to the jetty, but the kill switch doesn't work. He phones Gulf Oil's operations manager to report the emergency and then makes a radio control to the rescue boat, the Don Mark, to pick up the men stranded on the jetty. The radio control is overheard by nearby boats, the Snave and Bilboa, who quickly respond to the emergency. Connolly also calls the pump men stationed at the powerhouse to go to the jetty and do what they can to help. In the excitement, he forgets to sound the siren either on the Gulf Oil building or at the jetty. Over at Bantry Police Station, the Irish police, or Garda, are alerted to the emergency and can see the fire from their station. The officer on duty tries to call Gulf Oil's control room but can't get through because the lines are busy. At 0050, there's a series of smaller explosions in the port and starboard permanent ballast tanks. The pollution officer at the jetty begins pleading with Connolly on the radio to hurry up with the rescue boat. Connolly reassures him that the rescue boat is on the way to pick them up. Several crew from the Beetlejuice scramble down the gangway and run to Dolphin 22 at the eastern end of the jetty, hoping to be rescued. The pilot also contacts Connolly and tells him that he's on the aft deck of the tanker with 4 of the crew and they're jumping overboard. The pumpman sees the fire across the center of the Beetlejuice, but there's no fire on the jetty. There is fire on the water below the jetty, but it hasn't reached the catwalk or Dolphin 22. Connolly makes several more radio calls. He calls the postmistress to send for additional help and the duty tug Bantry Bay to assist. The Bantry Bay tug is 20 minutes away from the Beetlejuice and leaves immediately after the radio contact. The Don Mark is only able to leave the Ascon jetty opposite Dolphin 22 jetty at 0051 and is about 5 minutes away. By 0054, the fire gains strength with flames rising over 60 meters into the sky over the center platform. The fire reaches the jetty east of the center platform and engulfs the ship from midship back to the stern. The flames spread across the water towards the shore of the island. The Don Mark arrives at the Dolphin 22 jetty at 0058, with the Snave following 4 minutes later. But the rescue boat is already too late. It can't get close enough with the oil burning on the water and the intense heat from the flames. Both boats are helpless to save the lives of those trapped on the jetty. At Bantry, the Garda alert their superintendent, who immediately puts the major accident plan into operation. The local fire officer is alerted and the Bantry town fire siren is sounded. The fire services at Dunmanway and Skibbereen, the nearby counties, are also alerted. At 0106, a rumbling, cracking noise is heard from the Beetlejuice, followed by a massive explosion of the center ballast tanks. The force of the explosion splits the tanker's hull and the men on the jetty are thrown into the water. The oil cargo still on board ignites and the fire reaches a height over 90 meters with temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The explosion is so violent that pieces of the wrecked ship and oil assembly are blown into the Mila Valley over 6 miles away. A huge piece of shrapnel from the vessel, roughly the size of a car, narrowly misses one of the oil storage tanks on the tank farm. The sound of the explosions can be heard throughout most of West Cork and as far as 35 miles out. At the West Lodge Hotel in Bantry, the Sunday night dancing in the main function room is interrupted by the shaking floor. Outside, the flames light up the winter night skies above Bantry. On Whiddy Island, 14 families living on the island hurry to their boats to flee to the mainland. They describe the scene like Pompeii, with flames bursting 40 meters into the sky and shrapnel raining down on top of the cattle sheds, with the countryside lit up like it was mid-afternoon. The Gulf oil workers try to help, but the fire tender doesn't start. They have similar problems with the fire hydrants and fire hoses, and they don't have breathing apparatus or protective clothing. The tug, Bantry Bay, reaches the jetty at 0110. The skipper tries to pull the Beetlejuice away from the jetty, but the quick release mechanism on the jetty is stuck and the tank can't be freed. The Bantry, Skibbereen and Dunmanway fire brigades from the nearby county manage to get onto the island on small ferry boats. Bantry Fire Brigade finds that 2 Land Rovers and the terminal fire engine won't start. Then a truck bringing fire equipment from Ascot Jetty to the tank farm breaks down. The firefighters can't get near the burning vessel. The concrete jetty crumbles into the sea. The firefighters and Gulf Oil Terminal employees decide to concentrate their efforts on preventing the fire from spreading to the tank farm and containing the oil spill. About 12 hours after the explosion, at around 1300, the Beetlejuice sinks at her moorings in 30 meters of water, leaving its bow jutting out above the waterline. This extinguishes the main fire, and the firefighters extinguish the last flame at about 2000 on Sunday evening. Rescue workers can't get close to the wreck because of a cloud of toxic, inflammable gas surrounding the vessel, which could burst into flames without warning. It takes 2 weeks for the deadly cloud to dissipate before they can start recovering bodies from the wreck and pumping out the remaining crude oil cargo. In total, 51 people died. 41 crew members of the Beetlejuice, Baker's wife, the Irish pilot, a cargo inspector, 6 Gulf Oil jetty workers, and a Dutch diver who died during the salvage operations. Only 27 bodies were recovered from the 51 that died. The recovered bodies are buried in St. Finbar's Church graveyard overlooking Bantry Harbour. A Dutch salvage firm, L. Smith & Co., raised Beetlejuice in 4 sections. The bow was towed out to open water 100 miles offshore and scuttled. This attracted protests from the fishing community, so 2 sections were towed to Spain for disposal. The last section was broken up locally, but was only removed in July 1980. Local fishing grounds were badly contaminated, and a cleanup was only completed in 1983. The cost of the salvage, cleanup, and compensation totaled around $120 million, including compensation paid by Total, who owned the ship, to Gulf Oil. Most of the costs were paid by insurance companies, with claims and counterclaims being settled out of court. The Irish government appointed a tribunal to investigate the incident that went on for over a year and produced a 480-page report. The report cited 3 contributing factors, namely the poor condition of the 11-year-old Beetlejuice, the incorrect unloading sequences and ballasting, combined with the lack of crew training, and lastly, inadequate and poorly maintained firefighting and rescue systems both on the vessel and on the jetty. The tribunal was also critical of the government for its failure to put regulations in place to ensure proper safety and emergency procedures were followed. Gulf Oil never reopened the Whiddy Island terminal, and a feasibility study in 1985 showed that it no longer had any potential use in the international oil trade. The following year, Gulf Oil surrendered its lease on the site to the Irish government. After carrying out a limited refurbishment, the Irish government used the terminal to hold its strategic oil reserve. In the worst disasters, disbelief, complex decision-making, and indecision lead to lost time that always gives the unfolding events the upper hand. On the 20th of April 2010, while drilling at the Macondo prospect, an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon oil rig kills 11 crewmen and ignites a fireball visible 40 miles away. 2 days later, the rig sinks below the waterline, leaving behind the largest marine oil spill in history. Deepwater Horizon is an ultra-deepwater, dynamically positioned semi-submersible offshore drilling rig. The rig is capable of drilling oil wells in water as deep as 8,000 feet. Her high-tech dynamic positioning system uses 8 azimuth thrusters. Each azimuth thruster can rotate 360 degrees to hold her in a stable position 24/7. Each of her legs fills with seawater to act as ballast, stabilizing her in rough seas. She's owned by Swiss company Transocean and operated by BP, which leases the rig at a cost of $496,800 a day. BP then staff the rig, provide gear for the drilling, and contract support vessels to keep it operational, adding an additional $500,000 a day. At almost $1 million a day to drill an oil well, you could say the pressure is on to drill a new well as quickly as possible and move to the more important work of pumping and selling the oil. She's also equipped with eDrill, which transmits real-time drilling data to technical personnel in Houston, Texas. Deepwater Horizon drills wells in the Atlantis and Thunder Horse oil fields. She's considered a powerful rig with an exemplary safety record. In September 2009, the rig drills the deepest oil well in history at a vertical depth of 35,000 feet in the Tiber oil field at Keithley Canyon, approximately 250 miles southeast of Houston. During its lifetime, the rig's in operation for 93% of its working days. The rest of the time is spent moving between sites or undergoing regular maintenance. She measures 367 feet by 256 feet. The drilling deck is nearly as big as a football field. Her drilling derrick reaches 320 feet into the air and has 2 cranes alongside. Once stabilized, she reaches a depth of 136 feet. Below deck are living quarters for up to 146 people with amenities like a gym and movie theater. The crew refer to her as a floating Hilton. She's fitted with the latest technology in blowout prevention. A blowout is when high-pressure oil or gas escapes unchecked. An accidental spark during a blowout could create a catastrophic fire. She can divert oil and gas and seal off, then break free from the well if there's a blowout. She has systems to prevent explosions and alarms to warn the crew. The crew regularly practice responding to emergencies, and she has experienced leaders. They've got a 400-ton blowout preventer at the seabed with several different methods to shut off the well in an emergency. The most extreme is a powerful set of hydraulic shears that can cut through the drill pipe, seal the well, and disconnect the horizon from the well. This system is called EDS, or Emergency Disconnect System. A red button in the drill shack and the bridge activates the shears, but Transocean's well control handbook says they should only be used in exceptional circumstances. That might not matter because Transocean doesn't perform an expensive 90-day maintenance inspection that the manufacturer said should be done every 3 to 5 years. Industry standards and federal regulations say the same thing. BP and a Transocean safety consultant point out that the Horizon's blowout preventer, a decade old, is past due for inspection. Transocean decides its regular maintenance program is adequate for the time being. In February 2010, the Deepwater Horizon begins drilling at the Macondo prospect off the coast of Louisiana. The prospect is owned by BP, Anadarko Petroleum, and Moex Offshore. On the morning of April 20th, the drilling crew gather to discuss the day with their bosses. The main task for the day is finishing the well from hell. The Macondo well is behind schedule, and Deepwater Horizon is sent to get it back on track. Between February and April, the Horizon drills rapidly, which is welcome news for the crew, whose bonuses are tied to meeting schedules. Drilling quickly increases risk. The Horizon faces powerful and unpredictable geological forces. Rapidly pushing into a high-pressure oil and gas reserve 3 miles deep is risky. The Gulf of Mexico has unstable and porous formations, making it even more challenging. Heavy drilling fluid known as mud keeps disappearing into cracks in the rock formation. Mud is pumped into the drilling well to lubricate the drill head and stabilize the well. The mud then circulates back up the well pipe, carrying rock up and out of the well to the horizon. On the drilling rig, the rock is separated from the mud, which is then pumped back down to repeat the process. Losing mud into the porous rock formation reduces the weight bearing down on the surging oil and gas, causing violent kicks of pressure that make it difficult to control the well. Some weeks earlier, a particularly bad kick had left millions of dollars worth of drilling tools stuck in the well. Operations were halted for 9 days while gas continued to filter up. In the rig's office known as the Drill Shack, 2 BP executives and 2 senior Transocean officials are meeting with Jimmy Harrell, the rig's manager. They've flown out to praise the crew's safety performance and to discuss the Horizon's busy schedule. The rig has to finish the Macondo well and complete several repairs before starting 2 other high-priority projects for BP. The executives want to keep the Horizon on schedule. Bonuses are based on saving money and meeting deadlines. BP denies pressurizing the Horizon's crew to cut corners, but its plans for completing the well keep changing in ways that save time and increase risk. By early evening, one crucial test remains before the Horizon can plug the Macondo and move on. During the negative pressure test, the crew will withdraw the heavy mud from the well and replace it with lighter seawater to see if pressure builds up in the pipeline. If it does, it could mean oil and gas are seeping into the pipe. There are no industry standards or government rules. BP's instructions for the test are 24 words long. The BP executives and drilling crew work out the engineering but disagree over the test results. During the test, pressure builds up and Wyman Wheeler, who's in charge of drilling operations, is worried. A BP executive thinks the test went fine and rig managers debate whether to repeat the test. By 2000, the test has been repeated and everyone agrees the Macondo well is stable. In a few hours, the drilling crew's 21-day working tour will be over and a new crew will join the rig. Joseph Keith is monitoring the blowout gauges. He's never seen so much activity while sealing a well in his 7 years on the Horizon. This makes him uncomfortable. So many jobs happening simultaneously could throw off his instruments, but he doesn't tell anyone he's worried about monitoring the well. By 2050, the drilling crew are pumping mud out of the well to prepare for plugging it. This reduces the weight bearing down on the oil and gas. Mr. Easel, who's in charge of drilling, has been up for nearly 18 hours. He checks in one last time with the team for any lingering doubts about the final tests. They assure him everything is good and tell him to get some sleep. At 21:38, oil and gas passes through the Horizon's 5-story blowout preventer at the seabed. The blowout preventer is a fail-safe device, but once the oil and gas gets past the blowout preventer, nothing stops it from racing up the 5,000-foot riser pipe to the rig. Drilling mud gushes up and sprays from the well like a water fountain. A floor hand on an upper deck sees the rush of oily mud and his training kicks in. He looks around for help to install a special valve on the drill pipe which will suppress the blowout. But he quickly realizes there's no floor hands on the drilling floor to respond. Everyone is hurriedly preparing the rig so they can seal the well and head home. Mud and water is bouncing off the derrick in every direction with incredible force. The blowout sounds like a jet engine, a shrill, whining howl. Now the floor hand from the upper deck makes his way to the drilling floor. He's instantly soaked, his protective glasses coated in mud. A crane operator sees the mud subside for a moment. He thinks the drilling crew has it under control, but then it erupts again, even louder than before. A smoky haze of gas sprays from a pipe high up on the derrick. The Horizon has 2 ways to defend against oil and gas surging to the rig. The drilling crew can turn a valve and divert the blowout out to sea, or it can contain it on the rig by funneling it into a device called a mud gas separator. The mud separator is preferred for smaller kicks because it avoids any cleanup and the investigation into an oil spill. The drilling team are now working to control the blowout using the mud separator. It's quickly overwhelmed. A gas cloud spreads over the aft deck. The Horizon's 6 main diesel engines are fed by air intakes above the deck. If the engines begin to take in air mixed with gas, they run the risk of speeding up to the point of breaking apart. The engine control room is situated in the middle of 6 main engines. A computer console in the engine control room lights up, warning that sensors have detected gas somewhere on the rig. Up on the bridge, the crew feels a jolt. Kurt Kuchter, the 34-year-old captain of the vessel, senses something is wrong. There's a high-pitched hissing. On the CCTV, they can see mud flying into the ocean. Gas alarms start lighting up across the computer console in the control room. Gas is spreading over the rig from the drilling floor to the main deck. The lights are all magenta, signaling extremely high levels of combustible gas. The alarm system relies on dozens of sensors strategically placed all over the horizon. When a sensor detects fire or gas, a corresponding alarm lights up on computer consoles, not just on the bridge, but also in the 2 other crucial parts of the rig, the drill shack and the engine control room. In theory, this means anyone in the 3 critical locations can respond swiftly to the first sign of trouble. This system is designed to automatically trigger the general master alarm to signal the evacuation of the rig if it detects high levels of gas. Transocean has removed this automatic feature and set the general master alarm to be activated manually. The change has the Coast Guard's blessing, but concerns have been raised by the crew about the safety of the setup. Transocean didn't want people to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning for a false alarm. A young bridge officer, Andrea Fleitas, is on watch with her boss, Yancy Keplinger, the senior officer in charge of dynamic positioning. She's been trained to raise the alarm, and she knows they can also activate the emergency shutdown system, but she hasn't been trained to use the system. The emergency shutdown system would shut down ventilation fans to inhibit gas flow, turn off electrical equipment and limit ignition sources, and even shut down the engines. This is different from the emergency disconnect system. On the bridge, they don't activate any of these emergency response systems. Horizon's emergency shutdown system relies on human judgment. Transocean has been warned that crew members need to act quickly and correctly under stress, which makes the shutdown system vulnerable. A safety consultant has previously urged Transocean to change the system so human input is not critical for success. Transocean disagrees and says an automatic system is less safe. Most crew members know nothing about the unfolding emergency. They're sleeping, watching television, calling home and posting on Facebook, while a fine mist of gas envelops the drilling floor. The floor hands fighting the blowout can feel and taste it. Mr. Easel, who's in charge of drilling, is woken 15 minutes into his much-needed sleep by a call from the drilling deck. They're trying to fill in the well, but they need help. On his way through the hall, he passes one of the Transocean executives who wants to know what's going on. He doesn't respond. The drillers have had the foresight to turn off the pumps removing mud from the well, but they hold off on plugging it. They know they've still got the 400-ton blowout preventer with its powerful set of hydraulic shears to cut through the drill pipe and seal the well, but they would prefer someone else makes that decision. Then drilling fluids begin cascading onto the ship Damon B. Bankston, a 260-foot work vessel moored to the horizon. The Bankston's captain radios the horizon's bridge and is told to move to a safe distance. Men in the engine control room overhear the conversation with the Bankston on their radios. They have access to the emergency shutdown system. If they lift a plastic cover and hit a button, the engines will shut down in seconds, but nobody has raised the alarm. They've been told there's a well-controlled situation, but they have no reason to believe it's anything more than a routine kick. They don't know that highly explosive gas is gathering overhead. There's a risk in overreacting. If they kill the engines, the horizon will drift from its position over the well, possibly damaging the drilling equipment and forcing costly delays. In any event, they don't believe they have the authority to hit the emergency shutdown. The practice is to wait and listen for instructions from the bridge. In fact, there are no communications or coordination among the bridge, the drill shack, and the engine control room. The men in the engine control room do nothing. Emergency lights flicker on their console. Someone has triggered an emergency shutdown of the electrical and ventilation systems near the drilling floor. The bridge and the engine control room haven't hit the emergency shutdown. The men in the drilling shack have activated a system to prevent an explosion on the drilling floor, but that system doesn't affect the engines or the wider ventilation systems. 2 of the rig's 6 engines are running, engine 3 and 6. They're beginning to accelerate. They spin into a high-pitched whine. A safety device, the rig saver, should shut down the engines if they run too fast, but the high pitch keeps climbing. In the electronics shop next door, a computer monitor explodes. Then light bulbs begin popping one by one. Men on the drill deck are now jumping over pipes and running for the stairs that will take them down off the main deck. All the lights go out, throwing them into darkness. They turn down the stairs when they're hit by an explosion. Engine 3 has exploded. The engine control room and the electronics shop are nearest the blast. The first explosion blows the door off the electronics shop, hitting a technician in the head. Blood streams down his face. He clenches a penlight in his mouth and begins crawling. He reaches another door, but he's blown 30 feet back by a second blast. Engine 6. He begins crawling again. He climbs across 2 men in the engine control room. He assumes they're dead because they don't respond. He makes it to the lifeboat deck just outside the engine control room. The structure near engine 3 has been blown away, but the 2 lifeboats are intact. They're meant to hold 73 people. He considers launching one on his own, but instead he decides to offer his help on the bridge. 2 minutes after the first explosion, the bridge crew hits the general master alarm to rouse the sleeping crew. The explosions hit the Horizon crew members who are unaware of the threat. A crew member washing dishes in the galley is knocked out. Another in the laundry is left trapped and battered. A crane operator lays the crane boom in its cradle, then he's engulfed in smoke and flames as he exits the cab and goes down the spiral staircase. The blast wave from the second explosion briefly extinguishes the fire, but also knocks him headfirst to the deck, where he dies in a pool of blood with his head caved in. On the other side of the deck, the second crane operator is blown to the back of his crane cab by the second explosion. A fireball envelops the derrick and wraps around his cabin. Mr. Easel, the drill chief, is blown 20 feet into a bulkhead as he steps into his office. He makes his way on his hands and knees, following a flow of air until he realizes it's gas. He keeps crawling. He has to get out. Crew members make their way to the bridge. The engine control room and the drilling shack are both destroyed, and the bridge is the only control center left standing. They enter to find Captain Kuchta screaming at bridge officer Andrea Fleitas for pushing the Horizon's distress signal. A crew member yells to the captain that the engine control room is gone, and without power there's no way to fight the fire or control the rig. They're on a dead ship. The captain can't seem to compute that information. It's been 9 minutes since mud gushed onto the drilling floor. The captain asks Andrea Fleitas to make an emergency announcement, but she's frozen with fear and says she can't do it. Now, Yancey Keplinger, the senior officer in charge of dynamic positioning, gets on the intercom and calls out, "Fire, fire, fire." There's still one way to keep the Horizon from sinking. They need to activate the Emergency Disconnect System, or EDS, which will signal the blowout preventer to release the Horizon and seal the well. A supervisor responsible for the blowout system yells to the captain that he's hitting the EDS. This is the strongest possible measure left to save the rig, and there's still resistance. Someone says they need Jimmy Harrell, the rig's boss, to approve the use of the EDS. Jimmy Harrell is in the shower when the explosion starts. An explosion rips through his cabin. Glass and insulation are blown through the shower. His eye is injured, so with blood in his face and half blind, he makes his way to the bridge. When he arrives, the captain asks for permission to hit the EDS, which he approves straight away. Now they need to start the standby generators, which would give them enough power to start one of the remaining engines and fight the fires. 3 crew head to the generators, but they can't get them started. That doesn't matter because only one member of the 2 firefighting teams makes it to his fire station after the explosions. It's not clear if poor maintenance is responsible or perhaps the system's been damaged in the explosions, but the emergency disconnect system doesn't work. The Horizon is tethered to a well that they can't seal. There's nothing left for the crew to do but abandon the rig. A mass of dazed men and women make their way to the lifeboats. On the crowded lifeboat deck, they can feel and hear the flames engulfing the derrick. The crew pile into the lifeboats. Men are screaming at the coxswains to launch. The burning derrick might collapse at any moment, some are crying. Lifeboat number 2 leaves first without many of its assigned passengers. Darren Rupinski, the coxswain for Lifeboat 1, refuses to leave with empty seats. Now, men start jumping from the lifeboat deck into the Gulf. Some lose their footing on the crowded deck and fall into the water. The Gulf water is calm, and those that hit the water are able to swim away from the burning wreckage. Nitrogen tanks burst on the main deck. Both lifeboats leave with at least 10 people still alive on the rig. The 3 crew members who went to start the generators return to the bridge and find the captain, Andrea Fleitas, and Yancey Keplinger are still there. They decide it's time to abandon ship. They find an inflatable life raft, but they have trouble freeing it from the deck, inflating and lowering it. They haven't practiced this during evacuation drills. Small explosions go off around them and intense waves of heat come up from under the rig. They lower the life raft but can't paddle away from the burning rig. Captain Kuchta swims to a rescue boat launched by the Bankston, fetches a knife and returns to cut the raft free. The remaining survivors jump from the heli deck almost 200 feet high. Of 126 crew on board, 11 died, most of them from the drilling crew who were at the epicenter of the flames. Within 36 hours, the Deepwater Horizon slipped beneath the waterline. Oil continued to spill out of the well until it was capped on the 15th of July, almost 3 months after the accident, making it one of the largest oil spills in history. It strikes me that in accidents of this scale, decision-making is compromised by 3 factors. Disbelief that the events unfolding are actually happening, which is a very human response to a traumatic event. The first stage of grief is denial. Training that promotes the least costly remedy as a first resort, which leads to the crew's inability to recognize the severity of a situation, and they have to work out if they're going far enough to stop the situation from escalating. Most of the time, the situation is already 5 steps ahead of them. Now, I'm not an engineer, and so I couldn't say if it's feasible to make a blowout preventer that has only one job, rather than several degrees of decision making. Everyone is trying to avoid pushing the button because the result is so finite. Shears slice the pipe and it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to get back to the start position. Maybe there are some engineers out there who could answer this. Could a blowout preventer be designed to shut the well like a tap that can be turned on just as quickly as it's turned off? Imagine how easily any one of these decisions could be made if the tap could be turned off, a problem resolved without the pressure of time, and then 10 minutes later it's turned back on. BP and Transocean faced fines and cleanup costs in excess of $20 billion and further undisclosed payouts to those involved in the accident or affected by the oil spill. Analysts show a quarterly gross loss for BP of $17 billion in the months following the accident. By 2011, their annual gross profits bounced back to around $60 billion.
Platform, all personnel abandoned. Bloody hell, it's really on fire, isn't it?
On the 6th of July 1988, Piper Alpha oil platform explodes and sinks into the North Sea, killing 165 men in what can almost be described as a reasonable sequence of events. In the early 70s, a group of 4 companies collaborate on an exploration to find oil in the North Sea. In 1972, they get an exploration license, and in 1973, they discover the Piper oil field. The 4 companies form a joint venture called Occidental Petroleum Company Limited, OPCAL, and start work to construct the Piper Alpha oil platform and the pipelines to carry oil to the Flotter oil terminal on the Orkney Islands, which will receive and process the oil. The Piper Alpha platform is constructed by McDermott Engineering and Union Industrial Enterprise in 4 modules separated by firewalls. In 1975, the modules are joined together at McDermott's site in Ardezir in Scotland, then floated out to the Piper oil field, which sits in 475 feet of water. Module A is the drilling module. On the opposite side of the platform is Module D, the living quarters. The modules are organized so that high-risk activities are furthest from the crew facilities like living quarters and the control room. In 1976, oil production starts producing 250,000 barrels of oil per day and increases to 300,000 barrels a day under Phase 1 production, which is limited to oil only. Piper Alpha is the central oil platform. The main oil pipeline runs from Piper Alpha to Flotter. The Claymore platform pumps oil into the main pipeline 20 miles west of Piper Alpha. The Tartan platform pumps oil to the main line via Claymore. This means Piper Alpha pipes its own oil while Tartan joins the pipe at Claymore. Piper Alpha is one of the heaviest oil platforms operating in the North Sea. In 1978, major reconstruction is started in order to comply with UK gas conservation requirements to capture gas which is usually flared or burned off as a byproduct of oil extraction. By the end of 1980, a gas conservation module has been installed in Module B and C between the control room and the drilling well in order to capture gas and transport it to St Fergus north of Aberdeen in Scotland. The gas compression and control room are separated by a firewall. Gas and oil are produced in what is termed Phase 2 production. Both Tartan and Claymore pump gas to Piper Alpha, which in turn pumps all the gas to the MCP1 gas compressing platform 30 miles northwest of Piper Alpha and on to St Fergus on the mainland. Phase 2 production of oil and gas continues well into the 80s. By the late 80s, major reconstruction and maintenance is planned. In July 1988, 6 major projects are underway, including replacing the gas conservation module. OPCAL initially planned to reroute gas from Tartan and Claymore, then shut Piper Alpha down entirely while the reconstruction was underway. But in order to keep up with production, they found reasonable safety measures. Throughout the refit, they continued to produce 120,000 barrels of oil a day. In order to replace the gas conservation module on Piper Alpha, the platform returns to Phase 1 production where it produces oil and flares gas. The gas conservation module is removed. Gas from the Tartan and Claymore platforms is still routed via Piper Alpha. At 1200 on the 6th of July 1988, 2 condensate pumps A and B are separating condensate from gas so they can be processed further at different plants. Condensate is a light form of crude oil that separates from gas during the change of pressure and temperature between the well under the sea and the platform. Pump A gets shut down for biannual inspection and service. First, several meters away on the same pipeline, the pressure safety valve will be inspected and serviced. An engineer removes the pressure safety valve. The open condensate pipe is temporarily sealed with a disc cover, which is a flat metal disc. The cover is hand tightened so the safety valve can easily be replaced after its service. At 17:55, the inspection and service are not yet complete. At the end of his shift, the engineer fills in a permit which states Pump A is not ready and must not be switched on under any circumstances. At 1800, the day shift ends and the night shift starts. 62 men now run Piper Alpha, while 164 men eat, sleep, and try to relax in the living quarters. The shift manager is busy, so the engineer puts the permit in the relevant equipment box and leaves without discussing the loose-fitting flange. At 1800, there's also a change of shift for Piper Alpha's divers. The divers enter the water below the labyrinth of pipes. When they start their shift, they go down a steel staircase and kit up on a steel staging area. The staging area is under the oil processing platform Module B, which can become slippery. To combat this, the metal staging area has holes punched into it. These holes perform 2 functions. The raised edges give workers grip when walking around the structure, and they allow any oil drips to fall through rather than pool, which would be a hazard. The divers need to remove their work boots and then get into their dry suits. But these punched holes are sharp, which is good for grip but not pleasant to stand on barefoot. So the divers make a reasonable decision to set up a rubber mat. They kit up and enter the water at 1900. Piper Alpha has an automatic fire suppression system. If a fire is detected, the system will automatically start the diesel pumps. These diesel pumps can pull huge amounts of seawater from 120 feet below the waterline. A network of pipes then spray the decks to douse any flames. When divers are in the water, the fire suppression system is put under manual control. If the pumps are turned on automatically and a diver is near the intake at 120 feet, the divers would possibly be sucked against the intake cage and at best pinned until the pumps are turned off or crushed by the water rushing to fill the intake pipe. The procedure at Claymore platform is to keep the automatic system on while divers are in the water unless they're working within 10 to 15 feet of the intake pipe, in which case, like Piper Alpha, they would turn off the automatic system and operate in manual mode in the event of a fire. Health and safety inspectors have recommended Piper Alpha adopt the same procedure, but with all the reconstruction and maintenance going on, the decision is taken to implement that later. On the 6th of July 1988, the divers are not working near any intake pipes. Further up the pipeline, methane ice is causing a blockage which automatically shuts down pump B at 2145 to prevent pressure building up in the pipeline, and engineers can't restart it. The engineers speak with the shift manager to find out if they can start pump A. He reads the work permit for pump A and sees that the scheduled inspection and service has not yet started. Pump A is functional, and much like moving your car's annual service from one day to the next, it's reasonable to postpone the inspection and start pump A in order to relieve pressure on the pipeline while they clear the blockage. But the permit for servicing the safety valve on the same pipeline is stored in a different equipment box because the pump and safety valve are in different locations, and so he doesn't see the instruction not to start pump A under any circumstances. Under pressure to get the pipeline flowing and narrowly focusing on pump A in one location, the shift manager gives the okay to start pump A, not knowing that the safety valve plate is only hand tight. In fact, because the safety valve is several meters away and on a different level, the engineers don't see that the safety valve has been removed. At 2152, pump A is started. Condensate flows into the pipe, and almost immediately the engineers hear a high-pitched sound as gas leaks through the hand-tight metal disc covering the safety valve position. Localized gas alarms sound out, and men on the platform quickly search out the source of the leak. At 2155, the volatile condensate ignites and an explosion blows through the firewall separating the gas conservation module and the control center. The control room is almost destroyed and several key personnel are killed in the explosion. Jeff Bollins, a shift manager, survives the blast and pushes the emergency shutdown button, immediately closing the major valves which stop all gas and oil extraction. He then escapes the area with other able-bodied men. Debris from the explosion ruptures a small condensate pipe which ignites in the flame of the explosion. No alarm is activated in Module D, the living quarters of the platform, and because the control center has been destroyed, nobody is giving or receiving instructions to evacuate. Operators at Tartan and Claymore can see that something is wrong by the explosions lighting the sky 20 miles away, but they continue to pump oil and gas because they don't have the authority to shut down production, which could take days to get back online. At 2204, radio operator David Kinraid sends out a mayday call.
Mayday. Explosion and fire on the Piper platform. All personnel abandoned.
At 2205, Aberdeen Coast Guard Station dispatches a Sea King helicopter Rescue 138 from Lossiemouth Search and Rescue Station. The Royal Air Force dispatch a Hawker Siddeley Nimrod from their base at Kinloss to act as the on-scene commander Rescue 1. Support vessels in the North Sea hear the mayday and stand by to act as search and rescue vessels or floating hospitals. At 2206 in Module B, a crude oil storage tank ruptures from the heat. The area is quickly flooded by oil which ignites and billows out a black plume of smoke. The burning oil drips down onto the divers' staging platform and starts to pool on the rubber mat they've installed. The pooling fire grows until 2220 when it burns through the tartan pipeline, which explosively ruptures, fueling the inferno with almost 30 tons of gas per second. Sailors in ships as far as a mile away feel the explosion ripple through the air. At 2230, the Tharos support vessel draws alongside Piper Alpha. She operates as a multifunctional ship including accommodation, a hospital, saturation dive team, search and rescue facilities, and high-pressure water cannon. She uses her water cannon where possible, but it's too powerful to spray at full force, which could injure or kill anyone hit by the high-pressure water. A triage and reception area is set up on the vessel's helideck, staffed by an offshore medic and assisted by diver paramedics from the Tharos saturation diving team. The Sandhaven support vessel arrives on scene and deploys a fast search and rescue boat to find survivors in the water. At 22:50, the pipeline leading to the MCP-1 gas platform fails and explodes. The expanding gas pours back out of the pipeline and sprays flames over 300 feet into the air. The Sandhaven's fast rescue boat is trapped by debris from the explosion. Piper Alpha's steel structure starts to melt and the Tharos is forced to retreat from the heat of the flames. The Claymore platform stops pumping to Piper Alpha, but the 20-mile pipeline still holds a backlog of high-pressure condensate and gas. Men on Piper Alpha are either jumping from the platform into the freezing waters of the North Sea, or they're trapped in the living quarters, Module D, which is filling with black smoke. Mark Reed thinks of his 14-week-old baby boy as he jumps 175 feet from the helideck. At 23:18, the Claymore gas line ruptures and explodes. The backlog of pressure in the pipeline now joins gas from the Tartan pipeline to fuel the fire for hours to come. At 23:35, the Sea King helicopter Rescue 138 from Lossiemouth arrives at the scene, and the logistics of moving survivors and key personnel between ships and hospital on the mainland gets underway. Non-essential personnel are removed from the scene and replaced with paramedics from other platforms and ships. At 23:50, in the space of 2 hours since the first ignition from Pump A safety valve, the structure starts to collapse. The fire, fueled by the gas pipes rising out of the sea from under Piper Alpha, has been burning at over 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. It's melted the bottom of the structure, and now the infrastructure starts to crumble into the ocean. Then Module D, the living quarters, slips below the waterline with almost 100 men waiting for the signal to evacuate. The Sandhaven's trapped search and rescue vessel is pulled into the sinking structure. 2 of the boat's crew are killed, along with 6 Piper Alpha crew they had already rescued from the water. The skipper is the only man to survive. By 45 minutes past midnight, the drilling Module A is all that remains. Over the next hours, search and rescue boats and helicopters locate survivors and bodies. At 7:25, the last survivors are flown to hospital in Aberdeen. 167 men died, 61 survived. 30 bodies were never recovered. It takes a specialist firefighting team 3 weeks to extinguish the fire. In late 1988, a saturation dive team recovered the living quarters Module D from 475 feet of water, along with the bodies of 87 men trapped inside. While it's not reasonable to expect an outcome like this, the decisions made along the way were reasonable decisions. While those decisions remained isolated, Piper Alpha operated in relative safety. But when those decisions lined up, they created a deadly sequence of events.